Hi, my name's Rowena. I woke up in the ICU, bleeding, broken, and the surgeon said I needed family to sign for emergency surgery. I called my mom. She replied with just 5 words. Can't come. Your brother's promotion party. After giving over $500,000 to keep this family afloat, when I needed them once, just once, they chose a party over my life. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this and where from? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. Because what happened next? They never saw coming. It was late on a bitter Chicago evening, the kind of night when the cold gnaws at your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I had just finished a long day at the firm, spreadsheets and conference calls still echoing in my head. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend. Dinner plans, someplace warm, a chance to relax. I told her I'd be there soon. Driving home, I thought about how good it would feel to laugh over a meal, maybe share the news of my latest project being approved. But beneath the small flicker of pride was the same old ache, knowing there would be no call from my mom asking how my day went, no message from my siblings saying they were proud. I had stopped expecting those things years ago, but the absence still stung. The highway was slick with black ice. Streetlights stretched across the asphalt, reflecting off patches of frozen shine. I kept both hands steady on the wheel, the radio humming low. Then, in the span of a breath, everything shattered. A semi-truck up ahead jackknifed. I remember the way its red taillights twisted sideways, the scream of metal grinding against pavement. My tires lost grip. The world slowed into fragments, the crunch of glass, the violent lurch of my body against the seatbelt, my breath crushed out of me. A deafening silence followed, the kind that presses into your chest until you wonder if you're still alive. When the sound returned, it came all at once. Sirens, voices shouting, the acrid smell of gasoline. My vision blurred as strangers' hands reached in, pulling me free. A paramedic leaned over, his face tight with focus. Stay with me. You're gonna be okay. I wanted to believe him. But as they slid me onto the stretcher, memories collided in flashes. Birthdays where I sat alone by the cake, my mother too busy with more important things, the countless bills I paid when my father's business was sinking, the way my siblings laughed about me being the responsible one, like it was a punchline. Inside the ambulance, the siren's wail became the soundtrack to a lifetime of being dependable yet invisible. My chest tightened. My head spun. I tried to form words, but they caught in my throat. By the time we reached the hospital, the fluorescent lights above me were spinning. A doctor's voice cut through the haze. She needs emergency surgery. She can't sign for herself. A nurse leaned close, her voice softer. We need a family member, sweetheart. Who can we call? My fingers fumbled for my phone. I dialed my mother first. No answer. Then my father. Straight to voicemail. My sister. Nothing. Finally, I texted my mom. Minutes dragged like hours before the screen lit up. Can't come. Your brother's promotion party. Call your grandpa. 5 words. That was it. Not, are you okay? Not, we're on our way. Just a reminder that my brother's night mattered more than my life. My breath hitched. The heart monitor beeped erratically. I stared at the glowing letters until they blurred. Rage and despair churned together, heavier than the pain tearing through my body. How could they? After everything, after $500,000 spent saving them from debt, covering mortgage payments, bailing my brother out of his own messes, they couldn't give me this one moment. A nurse touched my arm gently. Do you want us to call your grandfather? I nodded weakly, tears burning, though I refused to let them fall. With trembling fingers, I reached into my bag and closed my hand around the old pocket watch Grandpa Harold had given me when I was a child. Its cool surface grounded me, a reminder of the only person who had never once failed to show up. As the anesthesia blurred my edges, I whispered to the watch, as if he could hear me, "Maybe you're the only one who ever really cared." The darkness crept in, heavy and final, and in that moment, I wondered if I'd wake up again, or if this was how they'd finally erase me. When I finally opened my eyes, the room swam into focus through a fog of medication and exhaustion. The steady beeping of machines grounded me, each pulse reminding me I was still here. My throat felt like sandpaper, my chest heavy, but the first thing I saw cut through the haze. It wasn't my mother's face leaning close, nor my father's stern expression pretending to care. It was Grandpa Harold. He sat slouched in the chair beside my bed, still in his oil-stained workshirt, as if he had rushed straight from the garage without stopping to change. His big, calloused hand was wrapped around mine, his thumb brushing gently across my knuckles. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered when he noticed my eyes open. Relief flickered in his tired gaze, though his smile was faint. "You scared the daylights out of me." Tears burned the back of my eyes, not from pain, but from the simple fact that he was there. "Grandpa." My voice was a rasp, weak and cracked. He leaned closer, helping me sip from a small cup of ice chips. "Take it easy. You've been through a lot." I tried to swallow, each shard of melting ice cooling the fire in my throat. How long?" "All night," he said quietly. "The surgery finished this morning. They patched you up good. You're tougher than you think." I studied him, his gray hair flattened on one side, the dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't left my side, I realized. He'd sat there through the hours of uncertainty, while the people who should have been there weren't. The thought gnawed at me. My family knew. The hospital had called them. "Grandpa, did Dad?" My voice trailed off. His jaw tightened and he hesitated before answering. "The hospital reached out. Your folks didn't come. They said they had other commitments." His voice was steady, but the pause told me everything. "Other commitments," I repeated softly, bitterness creeping into the words. A promotion party. My brother's big night. My life versus his career milestone. Grandpa gave my hand a squeeze. "They asked me to come. So I did. I signed the consent forms. You wouldn't be here if I hadn't." The words cut deeper than any injury. My own parents hadn't just failed to show, they refused to take responsibility for whether I lived or died. The man sitting beside me, the one who had fixed my bike when I was 9, who clapped the loudest at my school play when my parents were too busy, had once again carried me when they wouldn't. I closed my eyes, memories flooding back in waves, him showing up in the pouring rain when my car broke down, him slipping a 20 into my hand before a college exam just in case, him never forgetting a birthday even when no one else called. He had always been there. Always. "I don't understand," I whispered, my voice trembling despite my effort to hold steady. "I've given them everything. I've paid their bills, bailed out their debts, even covered my brother's mistakes. And when I need them once, just once..." My voice cracked. Grandpa's thumb stilled over my hand. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family." The words landed like a stone in my chest. Simple, unpolished, but truer than anything I'd ever heard. I turned my head slightly, noticing the pocket watch sitting on the nightstand. Its brass glinted under the sterile hospital light, a silent reminder of his steady presence in my life. He must have placed it there while I was unconscious. For a moment, gratitude warmed me, but beneath it, a darker ache stirred. My parents had made a choice, and it wasn't me. The truth I had always known, but never said out loud, was finally undeniable. I was the dependable one, the invisible one, the one they turned to for money, but never for love. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the machines keeping me tethered to life, and a thought surfaced, chilling and terrifying. Maybe to them, I was worth more gone than alive. That thought dragged me backward, deep into the corridors of memory, where the sterile scent of disinfectant from the hospital bled into the warm, dusty air of my childhood home in Cicero. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I wasn't a woman in her 30s lying in an ICU bed. I was 8 years old again, clutching a blanket too thin for a Chicago winter. I remembered the night Damon got sick. My older brother's fever had spiked so high that my parents rushed him to the emergency room. I stayed home with a neighbor, watching cartoons on a flickering TV, wondering why no one kissed me goodnight. From that moment on, it was like the universe had shifted. Damon became the center of every conversation, every sacrifice, every ounce of worry. They called me the easy one, quiet, self-sufficient, the child who didn't need much. That was supposed to be a compliment, but to a little girl, it felt like a life sentence. The memories stacked one after another. Waking up to make my own cereal while Mom hovered over Damon, coaxing him to eat toast. School concerts where I stood on stage, scanning the crowd, pretending not to notice the empty seats where my parents should have been. When teachers asked, "Your parents couldn't make it?" I'd shrug with a smile so well-rehearsed it almost convinced me it didn't hurt. Even then, Grandpa Harold was different. I could still see him in the back row of the auditorium, his grease-stained hands folded over his chest, grinning like I was the star of Broadway. He never made excuses about being too tired or too busy. He just showed up. Always. As I drifted back into the present, the hospital lights glared above me. My throat ached, my body stiff. On the nightstand, Harold's old pocket watch caught the light, its familiar glint pulling me back to him. He'd placed it there on purpose. I knew it. It was his way of telling me, "You're not alone, not as long as I'm breathing." But as I stared at it, bitterness gnawed at my gratitude, because behind every memory of Grandpa showing up was the echo of my parents choosing Damon, choosing him over me. Every time. College was no different. Damon had health issues, they said, even long after he'd recovered. So while he focused on his well-being, I worked 2 jobs to cover my tuition and still sent money home so Mom and Dad wouldn't lose the house. When bills piled up, I paid them. When Damon wrecked his car, I covered the repair. And the praise? It always went to him. "Look at Damon," they'd gush. "He's really turning his life around." No one said, "Look at Rowena. She's holding us all together." Lying there in that hospital bed, I whispered into the silence. It was never about love. It was about what I could provide. The words chilled me as they left my lips. They rang too true. My worth wasn't measured in hugs or phone calls on my birthday. It was measured in checks, in sacrifices, in how much of myself I could carve away to keep them afloat. And now, when I had nothing left to give, flat on my back, tubes and wires keeping me alive, they'd chosen a party. They'd chosen appearances. I felt something crack deep inside, sharper than any bone broken in that crash. Years of holding my tongue, of swallowing disappointment, of believing if I just gave enough, one day they'd look at me and see more than utility. It all shattered. Maybe it wasn't an accident that I was the one bleeding alone. Maybe some part of them had always believed I could take the hit, because I always had. And 3 weeks after the crash, I finally managed to stand on my own 2 feet. My legs shook the first time, but I stood anyway, and that was the moment I promised myself. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The apartment was quiet that morning. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, throwing pale stripes across my living room carpet. My body still ached, my ribs stiff and tender, but I moved slowly, making my way to the desk where a pile of unopened mail waited. I hadn't had the strength to deal with anything since I got home from the hospital. I was just beginning to clear the envelopes when my phone lit up. The name on the screen froze me. Mom. I let it ring once, twice. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something in me wanted to hear what excuse she'd prepared. so I answered. "Hi, honey." Her voice flowed like syrup. Too sweet, too careful. "Oh, it's so good to finally hear you. We've all been so worried." I stayed quiet, pressing the phone to my ear, waiting. "You know we would have been there if we could," she continued, rushing her words as if filling the silence would soften the truth. "But Damon's promotion party was that night. It was his big moment. You understand, don't you?" The words sliced me open all over again. I let them hang between us, the silence heavier than anything I could have said. I could almost hear her shifting uncomfortably on the other end. Finally, I said softly, "I'm tired. I'll call you later." And I ended the call. I set the phone down and stared at it for a long moment. For the first time in my life, I realized silence could be sharper than anger. My whole childhood, I had filled the gaps for my parents, with money, with excuses, with understanding they didn't deserve. Now, silence was my turn to let them sit in the emptiness they created. My chest rose and fell slowly as I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. A thick folder waited inside. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I'd kept it. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every mortgage payment I'd made in their name. Tuition checks for Damon. Utility bills I'd covered when they couldn't or wouldn't. A decade's worth of evidence of what I'd sacrificed. I spread the papers across the desk, the edges curling from time. As I sorted through them, Harold's words echoed in my head. "Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family." Beside the papers sat his pocket watch, its steady ticking filling the silence. I picked it up, running my thumb along the smooth, worn surface. It was like Harold was still here, steady and unshakable, reminding me I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "They think silence means surrender. They're about to find out it doesn't." For hours, I worked through the papers. I highlighted dates, circled amounts, clipped documents together. Every page told a story they had long ignored, a story where I was the invisible backbone of a family that never once turned around to see who was carrying them. By nightfall, the stack had grown into neat, heavy bundles. My apartment was dark except for the desk lamp glowing over the papers. The ticking of the pocket watch was the only sound. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion weighing on me, but a quiet fire burned underneath. I had 72 hours to decide how loud my silence was going to be. When the papers were finally ready, I knew there was no turning back. I'd stacked them in neat piles on my desk the night before, staring at the evidence of every sacrifice I had made. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed someone willing to turn those papers into action. That's how I found myself walking into a law office downtown on a chilly Friday morning. The receptionist pointed me toward a glass-walled office at the end of the hall, where a woman in her late 40s sat behind a polished oak desk, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. Karen Walsh. I'd heard she was sharp, uncompromising, and more than willing to take on messy family cases others avoided. "Ms. Rowena," she said, standing and shaking my hand firmly. "Let's see what you've brought me." I sat across from her, the folder of documents heavy in my lap. As she flipped through the pages, bank transfers, mortgage checks, tuition receipts, I caught the slightest smirk tug at the corner of her mouth. "You've been their lifeline for years," she said flatly, her eyes scanning a highlighted statement. "They'll have no defense, not legally, not morally." Hearing it out loud made my stomach tighten. This wasn't just an emotional battle anymore. It was real, on paper, undeniable. Karen leaned back in her chair, folding her hands together. "The property is in your name, correct?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good. That gives you full authority. You can issue a 72-hour notice. They'll have no choice but to comply, or they'll face eviction through the courts. And trust me, if it comes to that, the public record won't be kind to them. People don't forgive parents who abandon their own child in a hospital bed." Her bluntness was both comforting and terrifying. I hesitated, staring down at my hands. Does this make me a monster? Throwing out my own parents? Karen leaned forward, her gaze steady. No. They made their choice when they left you bleeding in that hospital bed. You're not throwing them out. You're reclaiming what's yours. Her words hit me hard, but doubt still lingered. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. On the screen was the message I'd saved, burned into my memory. Can't come. Your brother's promotion party. I slid the phone across the desk without a word. Karen read it and shook her head slowly. That's all the proof you need, she said softly, though her voice carried an edge. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The guilt I had carried began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet clarity. Silence wasn't cruelty. It was justice. My fingers brushed against the pocket watch in my coat pocket. The ticking felt steady, grounding me, just like Grandpa Harold always had. Draw up the papers, I said, my voice calm, steady, unshaken. Karen's smirk deepened into a smile. Consider it done. She began typing immediately, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I sat there, watching the foundation of my new life take shape. The papers I'd spent nights organizing were now weapons, not to hurt, but to defend. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to beg for love or acceptance. I was going to demand respect, even if it came at the cost of breaking what little family ties remained. By the time I left her office, the city lights were flickering on, the sun sinking behind the skyline. The folder was lighter, but my resolve heavier. As I stepped into the cold evening air, I whispered to myself, in 72 hours, the house they'd called theirs would no longer be theirs at all. I thought I was prepared. I'd told myself over and over that I had made peace with my decision, but nothing could have braced me for the storm that showed up at my door 2 nights before the eviction deadline. It was late evening, the city outside humming low like it always did before midnight. I had just settled into the couch with a stack of documents spread across the coffee table, the pocket watch ticking beside them, when my phone buzzed. It was the doorman. Ms. Rowena, he said, his voice uneasy. There are 3 people down here insisting they're family. They won't leave unless you talk to them. My stomach nodded instantly. I didn't have to ask who. Against my better judgment, I exhaled slowly and told him, let them up. Moments later, a knock, sharp, impatient. Before I could reach the door, it swung open. Damon pushed his way in like he owned the place, my parents right behind him. My dad's face was crimson, veins visible at his temples. Mom already had tears streaming down her cheeks. Damon wore that infuriating smirk I'd seen too many times, the one that said he believed he was still the golden boy, untouchable. This nonsense ends now, Dad barked, using my full name like I was a child in trouble. You're not really going through with this. Tell me you're not. Damon let out a short laugh, shaking his head. All this because you didn't get enough attention? Grow up, Rowena. You're embarrassing yourself. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked calmly into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and carried it back to the couch. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than if I'd screamed. I sat down, set the glass on the table, and looked at them without saying a word. Mom broke first, clutching her chest as if the weight of my silence was crushing her. Honey, please. We raised you. You can't just throw us out like we're strangers. My chest tightened, but I stayed still. Damon leaned over the coffee table, planting his hands beside my documents. Retract it, he hissed. Do it now, or I'll ruin you. Everyone will know you abandoned your own parents. You'll be the monster, not us. The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they were exactly what I had feared. The picture he painted was one I'd lived in the shadows of for years, the selfish daughter, the ungrateful child. My throat tightened. For a split second, I felt like that invisible little girl again, waiting for someone to show up for her. Mom's sobs filled the room. "You'll regret this when we're gone," she cried. I closed my eyes briefly, the tears threatening, the weight of decades pressing down. Then my fingers reached for the pocket watch. I clicked it open and shut, the steady tick reminding me of Harold's words. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family. When I opened my eyes, the doubt was gone. "I already regret giving you everything and getting nothing back," I said evenly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Dad stiffened. Damon's smirk faltered for the first time. I stood, walked to the fridge, and tapped the eviction notice taped neatly to the door. "You've got 48 hours. I suggest you use them wisely." Silence fell over the room. Not the kind that comforted, but the kind that burned. Damon's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as though he'd just realized the game wasn't his to win anymore. I walked back to the couch, lifted the glass of water, and took a slow sip. "The door's behind you," I said softly. They didn't move at first, as though waiting for me to take it back. But I didn't. Eventually, Dad muttered something under his breath and turned toward the hall. Mom clung to his arm, still crying. Damon lingered, eyes locked on mine. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something sharper, resentment, maybe even fear. As the door finally clicked shut behind them, I sat there in the quiet, my heart pounding but steady. For the first time, I knew I'd struck the right nerve. The morning after the confrontation, I walked into the office feeling like I'd survived a storm, but with the uneasy sense that another was coming. Downtown Chicago was brisk, the wind cutting as I hurried from the train, clutching my bag like it held my last bit of strength. The moment I stepped off the elevator, I noticed it. The silence. Colleagues who usually greeted me with quick nods or small talk looked away. A few whispered. My assistant, Clara, stood by my desk, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said softly, holding out her phone. On the screen was a Facebook video, already with thousands of shares. Damon, holding a phone like some news anchor, filmed my parents sitting on the floor of their living room, boxes stacked behind them. My mother's face was streaked with tears. My father spoke, voice heavy with disappointment. "Our daughter," Damon narrated dramatically, "decided her parents weren't worth keeping a roof over. After everything they did for her, she threw them out into the cold." My breath caught. The video panned to my mother, who whispered, "We never thought she'd do this to her own family." The comments scrolled beneath, hundreds of strangers calling me heartless, selfish, even cruel. My stomach turned, and for a second, I thought I might collapse right there in the hallway. Clara touched my arm gently. "Your boss asked to see you." I walked into his office on legs that felt like lead. Mr. Hanover leaned back in his chair, his expression tight. "Rowena," he began carefully, "we've had over 200 emails since this morning. Clients are threatening to pull accounts if your name stays attached to ours. They don't want the publicity." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "You can't possibly believe—" He raised a hand. "It's not about belief. It's about perception. I'm asking you to take a leave of absence until this blows over." The words hit harder than I expected. I nodded stiffly, too drained to argue. Leaving his office felt like walking through fog. The stairs followed me all the way to the elevator. By the time I got home, the weight of it all pushed me straight onto the couch. I buried my face in my hands, the video replaying in my head, my parents' staged misery, Damon's smug narration. Was this it? Was this how he'd finally erased me? My eyes drifted to the coffee table, to the pocket watch Harold had given me. I picked it up, feeling its steady tick against my palm. Its rhythm was calm, patient, like Harold himself. For a moment, I let the sound ground me. Hours later, A knock pulled me from my haze. I opened the door to see Mia, the teenage girl from down the hall. Her eyes were red, her voice small. "I overheard them," she said, twisting the hem of her sweater. "Your parents. They were in the lobby earlier. They said you don't deserve family. But I wanted you to know. You're not what they say." "You helped me with my scholarship forms, remember? If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't even have applied." Her words pierced through the fog like light through a crack. I saw myself in her trembling face, the little girl who'd been told for years she wasn't enough unless she was useful. I knelt a little, steadying her shoulders. "Thank you, Mia. That means more than you know." When she left, I closed the door slowly and leaned against it. Something inside me shifted. If Damon wanted war, then fine. But this time, I wasn't going to play by his rules. I sat back at the table, pulled my laptop closer, and began to gather everything. Screenshots of bank transfers, emails, receipts for bills I'd paid, even copies of their mortgage I'd shouldered. Every sacrifice, every silent compromise, laid out like evidence. The ticking of the pocket watch grew louder in the quiet room. For the first time in weeks, the fear loosened its grip. I whispered to myself, steady and sure, "If they want a fight, I'll give them one. On my terms." As the files stacked higher on the screen, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of losing everything. I was ready to take it all back. Well, 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting on a wooden bench inside Cook County Circuit Court, the steady hum of whispered conversations surrounding me like a swarm of bees. The room was packed. Reporters lined the back, cameras flashing every time the door opened. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in years leaned forward in their seats, eager for drama. And then there were strangers, people drawn in by the viral circus Damon had created. Across the aisle, Damon sat smugly in a tailored suit, his legs crossed, a phone resting on his knee as though he couldn't be bothered to care. When our eyes met, his smirk widened, like he already knew the ending of this story. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to breathe, feeling the cool weight of Harold's pocket watch in my pocket. Its ticking steadied me. The bailiff called the room to order, and Damon's lawyer stood first. He had that polished, almost oily voice that carried just enough pity to sound convincing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pacing slowly, "we are here today because a daughter, this woman," he pointed at me, "decided her aging parents were a burden to be discarded. Instead of gratitude for all they've given, she offered eviction papers. Heartless, cold, selfish." A ripple of murmurs ran through the gallery. I sat still, my fingers laced together tightly in my lap. "Let them talk," I told myself. "The truth is coming." When it was our turn, Karen Walsh, my attorney, rose without any theatrics. She didn't need them. Her presence alone commanded the room. "Over the past decade," she began, sliding documents onto the evidence table, "my client has paid over $500,000 of her family's expenses. Mortgage, medical bills, college tuition for her brother Damon." She paused, her eyes cutting briefly toward him. "And when she lay in an ICU bed, her life hanging by a thread, do you know what her family told the surgeon?" She gestured to the clerk. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the projector flickered on, and then it appeared, larger than life, on the screen. The text. "Can't come. Your brother's promotion party. Call your grandpa." Gasps filled the courtroom. A woman in the back muttered, "Oh my God." I heard a few people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Damon's confident smirk faltered, just slightly. Karen let the silence stretch before speaking again. That was the response. Not a call. Not a visit. Not a moment spared for their daughter's life. Just 5 words. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hayes, is this authentic? Damon's lawyer stammered. Objection, Your Honor. Overruled, the judge snapped. Answer the question. Damon cleared his throat, his usual swagger slipping. I mean, yes, but you have to understand, Karen cut in smoothly. Did you confirm her injuries were minor before you posted your viral video painting her as a monster? His jaw tightened. It wasn't like that. Answer the question. No, he muttered. The jury's eyes narrowed. Even the judge's expression hardened. Karen turned back to them. This isn't about a daughter turning her back on her parents. This is about a family turning their back on her, time and time again, until she had no choice but to draw the line. The deliberation didn't take long. Less than an hour later, the jury filed back in. My heart hammered as the foreman stood, unfolding the verdict slip. We find in favor of the plaintiff. A collective gasp swept the room, followed by claps and cheers, despite the judge banging his gavel for order. I sat motionless for a moment, the relief washing over me so intensely it felt unreal. Karen placed a firm hand on my shoulder. You did it. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out Harold's watch, and clicked it shut with a soft snap. My eyes stayed calm, steady, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. As the crowd filed out, Damon stormed past me, his face red with fury. He leaned down just enough so only I could hear him. This isn't over, he hissed. But deep down, I knew it was. As 2 months had passed since the trial, and my home finally felt like mine again, not just the walls or the furniture, but the quiet itself. I'd wake up in the morning to the soft hum of the city outside, make a cup of coffee, and sit by the window without that weight on my chest I'd carried for years. The newspapers had run their stories. The verdict had been splashed across headlines, complete with that text message projected in court for everyone to see. Damon's video campaign had backfired spectacularly. People who once liked his posts now unfollowed him in droves. Business contacts that had been so quick to nod along with him cut ties, and extended relatives, those who'd once whispered about me being difficult, suddenly had no room for him when he came knocking. My parents faded into the shadows too, staying with some cousin out in Indiana, far enough away to be forgotten, but close enough that I still felt their absence like an echo. One morning, as I was watering the flowers in the little patch of dirt I called a backyard, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. I hope you're happy. We lost everything because of you. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My thumb hovered, but I didn't reply. I simply pressed delete. For years, I'd begged for even a fraction of her approval. Now, her words no longer had power over me. That afternoon, my daughter and I knelt in the soil together, planting marigolds and lavender. The sun dipped low, casting long golden streaks across the grass. She looked up at me, dirt smudged across her cheek. Mom, she said softly, does this mean it's just us now? I brushed her hair back and smiled. Just us. And we're going to build something better. Later, after dinner dishes were stacked neatly by the sink, I sat down at the small desk in the corner of my living room. The paperwork was there. Finalized lease agreements for the Mount Prospect house. The ink was dry, the first deposit already in my account. I logged into the bank app and, with a steady hand, transferred the money directly into my daughter's college fund. Watching the numbers shift on the screen, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. On the table beside me, Harold's pocket watch glinted under the lamplight. I picked it up, winding it slowly. The steady tick no longer felt like a countdown to disappointment, but a rhythm of survival. I held it close and whispered, "You were right, Grandpa. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family." From the window, the Chicago skyline stretched out, lights twinkling like quiet promises. I leaned back in my chair and let the calm settle over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying old wounds or wondering what I could have done differently. I had chosen myself, and it was enough. They took my love for granted. They mistook my silence for weakness. But I learned silence can also be power. And this time, I chose me. I let the words sit in the stillness, more for myself than anyone else. Then I turned to my daughter's room, listening to her steady breathing as she slept. The life we were building was fragile, maybe even messy, but it was ours. Do you think I was too cold? Or finally fair? What would you have done in my place?